The rest of us, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 5. Let's see. A lot of technical difficulties this morning. That brings a frustration in me. Some may say it's an anger. So there's a lot of times, if you look in the news, it seems like violence. It seems like there's a lot of murders happening. I don't know proportionally if it's more or we're just noticing it more because the news is covering it more. But it just seems like there's a lot of death and violence that's happening. I mean, recently we had the Delphi girls, and now that woman was discovered in the creek yesterday down in southern Indiana. So there's a lot of just violence that happens. And so we live in a very violent society. And I want you to notice that up here, you may not see me as a violent person, and I'm not, but I do in my past have violence. If you didn't read the newsletter, I got in fights when I was 5 years old in Waveland Park, and that didn't stop. It always seemed like there was violence in Park because when I was about 17 years old, me and my friend we were sitting, all of our friends were sitting at their house, and next thing you know, we got a call that one of our other friends was in Noblesville, Indiana, and they were in a park, and someone had punched him through the window. And so here we are, 90s kids, we listen to rap music, we get all mad, we get all angry, and so we pile in 3 cars deep, and we go down there, and we want to defend, and we want to make sure this doesn't happen again. And when we pulled up, there were 40 kids in that park. 40 kids. Wall to wall, and my friend gets out of the car and he goes around, and I get out, and I may look big, but when I saw those 40 kids, I was like, I don't know if I want to fight them because they like outnumber us. And he walks up there and he's like screaming, who hit him? And next thing I know, there's just this mass. It looked like locusts just flying in, and they just started hitting him. And someone whipped out a knife and tried to cut him, and they just nicked his nose, and he's lost it. I mean, anger is starting to boil over. I mean, they look like a bunch of dogs just coming after him, and so he gets to the back of his Explorer, and he pulls out his shotgun, and he points it at the crowd. In that moment, I'm thinking, we're going to be on the news. This is horrible. At that moment, fear had anger had boiled so much within us that it got to the point of this. And I was frightened. Luckily, he put the gun down and we took off, and of course the police were chasing after us, but I was almost involved in a gun violent crime. Anger can make us do some stupid things. Some absolutely stupid things. And so Jesus is going to talk about that in this part of his sermon on the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 5 verse 21 says, "You have heard it said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment." And so these people who are listening to Jesus up to this point, they pretty much knew the law. They knew that murder is wrong. You don't really have to be a genius to know that murder is wrong. But he's addressing this crowd. He's going into this tangent about the law. He goes into divorce, he goes into vows, he goes into retaliation, and ultimately about loving others. And in this, we're supposed to fight for what is right. And Jesus lays down a higher call to the law to those who are following him. People don't think that just because Jesus came and saved us by his grace doesn't mean that we shouldn't obey him. These laws are here to protect us. And Jesus isn't about protecting the surface of who we are. He wants to protect the very core of who we are. And so a lot of these laws just touch what we do. They don't really affect who we are on the inside. Jesus isn't just interested in your eternal destination. He doesn't just want to change the exterior, what you do and what you don't do. He wants to change what ultimately decides what you do and what you do. He wants to change the core of who you are. He wants to change your heart. And in order to do that, we've got to get deeper than just surface things. And so these teachers were more interested in looking the part than having a changed heart. And I think at times we can fall into that. We would rather look the part than change our heart. And so Jesus, who starts out this portion of his sermon, he says, you've heard it said, thou shalt not murder. And up to this point, they all had heard it. You see, murder is more than just killing somebody else. Killings happen all the time in just wars. This word murder means unjust killing. It means there's no reason why someone should kill another person. For that reason, it's murder with hate and malice. It's a premeditated, intentional killing. This isn't defending yourself and you have to pull out your gun and it's either him or you. No. This is murder, taking innocent life. Not just killing, it's murder. And the judgment for this is death. In Genesis chapter 9, verse 6 says, whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God, for in the image of God has God made mankind. And so for the very thought of removing someone from this earth, murder is wrong because it's ridding the world of yet another person who was made in the image of God. It's his breath ceasing to be within their lungs. And no one in here has to believe in Jesus. You don't have to go to this church for the last 40 years to understand that murder is wrong. As a society, we understand that. We have that common value. There's something deep within us that when we see that two girls from Delphi died the way they died, that's wrong. And within us, we want justice. We'll talk about, we'll pray about what we want. We want justice. We want the person who did that to face the penalty. But the reality is, murder, it does affect the person who's murdered. They're gone. Their life has ended. But there's a ripple effect that happens into their family, and it rips families apart. You see, Charles had this deep anger problem. He probably was psychotic. Never got treatment. And he was just stressed out at work, about to lose his job, going through bankruptcy, and him and his wife weren't doing well in their marriage, and so he comes home early from work, and he pulls out a gun, and he shoots her while his son and daughter are at school. And then he calls the police. And so what happens is these police officers keep the kids at school because they don't want them to come home to this. And they're calling Cheryl, his wife, who's now dead, calling her parents to come in from Washington to take care of the kids. And Charles's parents is trying to get a hold of the school and say, hey, our grandkids are there, but in the living will, the kids went to Cheryl, and so they have the murderer's parents wanting to take care of their grandkids, and so this is ripping their family apart. Charles was put on trial, and in the midst of that trial, there was a custody battle over these kids, and these kids are just feeling abandoned. They're tossed back and forth. There's the reason why I say that is because later on, you kind of understand why the son gets addicted to heroin. Then he overdoses and dies. The daughter, she's trying to find acceptance in every man that she could find. And she gets pregnant at the age of 14. That child has to be put up for adoption. And she has this guilt, this shame, a broken family. It's this ripple from this murder just devastated not just one generation, but many generations. She ended up having another child at the age of 22. And this child, she raised. She was prone to addiction. She was broken. She was hurt. She didn't have the family structure that she was born into, that she deserved, because murder had taken it away, and she ended up taking her own life. And so now this 6-year-old daughter doesn't have parents. You see, murder can devastate a family. It can destroy people. And God commanded us to not unjustly end the life of another. And for many of us, we're like, no duh. But Jesus goes deeper than this. Because yes, murder, it'll catch the headlines. But some of us, including myself, we harbor something within us that can devastate a family just as much. Jesus, he looks at what causes murder, and he goes deeper. He's not just here to stop you from killing one another. He wants to stop from what kills, ultimately, relationships. And that's anger and hatred. And so he continues on. He says, "But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or a sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother, Racha, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell." Anger isn't bad. Just anger isn't bad. We can be angry what happened with those Delphi girls, with that woman who was killed. Just anger, godly anger. But this isn't. He isn't talking about a just godly anger. He's talking about a human anger. And the term, who is angry, in the Greek, that's basically saying that is who you are. You are an anger-filled person. It's boiling out of you. This is who you are. You're not defined by the love you give to others. You are defined by the anger you hold to somebody. And Jesus is saying you are killing relationships. When a marriage is defined by anger and hate, you better believe on the horizon there's going to be most likely a divorce. Jesus is saying that in the eyes of God, the same judgment that falls on someone who commits murder falls on those who hate. And we think, oh, that's crazy. Murder is so much worse than hate. But if we're putting animosity between us and it's ceasing a relationship, it's ceasing what God has gifted us with, it is a sin. And all sin separates us from God. And he's not just here to make sure you don't murder your spouse. He wants to make sure you love your spouse. To not replace that love with hate and anger. You see, hate is a feeling, and murder is action. And so he kind of goes through a progression, and if we murder, we deserve judgment, and that word judgment is the Greek word crisis, and so we receive the same judgment when we are angry with someone who we are supposed to love. It says brother or sister, but really it's who we're called to love. Anyone could be your brother or sister. Then he goes a little bit deeper. He says, anyone who says Raka is answerable to the court, to like Judge Judy or somebody, And then he goes even further. The greatest judgment is given to the least action. Why? This is to express that all sin separates us from what God wants us to be about, and that's love. And when we replace love with hate, we are killing relationships. It is a sin to hold hate in your heart. Have you ever been angry, so angry, that you wanted to punch somebody in the throat? Come on, let's be honest now. A few years ago, I played basketball, and I was playing, and there was this one kid. He was always this taller than me, and I think he had a little man complex, and he wanted to take out the big man, and so he always guarded me, and every single time he guarded me, he would like hug me, he would punch me in the kidneys. If you don't know, that's not part of basketball. You Purdue fans, it's not part of basketball, okay? I got some bad stares on that one. Anyway, so we all get angry at times, but I was tolerating it for weeks on end. Pretty soon he's like kneeing me in my tailbone. And if this was 1997, I may not have pulled a gun out on him, but I probably would have punched him in the throat. But I had to walk away. And that was the hardest thing. And not only did I have to walk away, I couldn't hold that anger in my heart. I had to walk away, cool down, come up to him afterwards, shake his hand, and then I had to step away for a few weeks. Because I was just getting angry. I mean, we were talking back and forth. He was getting up in my face. He definitely wanted to fight, and I really didn't want to fight him and then be the headline and then the local newspaper, minister punches dude in throat. It's just not, I didn't want to be part of that. But have you ever got angry at someone so much that it replaced the love that you're supposed to have for them? I think all of us in here can admit that that's happened. And when we do that with every relationship that we have, you are anger, you are not love. It happens to me, and it happens to everyone. It can happen to a mother who has a toddler and a father who has a toddler, that they push that button on that toy and it sings that same song, "It's a small world after all," over and over and over, to the point you're like, stop! And you're angry. You don't hate the child, but you're angry. And then pretty soon that anger can turn to hate. And it can affect the way you love someone you are called to love. Everybody in here has had at some point in their life where they've replaced the love that they're supposed to have somebody with hate. I've had a kid that I coached basketball in. So he was so frustrated with me. I was trying to help him with one of the skills, and he couldn't score on me, and he was getting frustrated to the point where he hated me, like still hates me. You see, Jesus is getting to the heart of murder. He wants to find the root of murder because he knows where it is. He wants to find the epicenter of the law. And by bypassing the surface and equating murder with hate, he shares with us that when we hate, we murder relationships. In his kingdom, his grace can change a heart full of hate and replace it with love. But when we don't allow his love to unbind our hateful heart, we ruin the relationships around us. The same thing, our heart that has the potential to love and sacrifice for our wife can hate her to the point of killing her, hitting her. That's what happens. And people who physically abuse their spouse, they didn't, go before the congregation or go in the church and, for richer, for poorer, till death do you part, and think, I think I'll end up hitting her one day. No. At that moment, they are going to love that person. And somewhere along the way, hate began to replace that love. And hate replaces that love when we allow anger to simmer in our hearts and grow its tentacles within it. Everyone here has the capacity, like those boys in the park, including myself, to look like a bunch of animals. We have this primal instincts where we just start attacking one another, right? And maybe you had an argument with your spouse, and it's if you just looked at it at a distance, and I put a videotape on you, we would look at like a bunch of animals attacking one another. Each of us have the capacity to get angry at the person at McDonald's when we're hungry, their order is taking too long, and we're, right? Yeah? Everyone has the capacity to get angry at some of the littlest things. A nurse reported one day that a couple had arrived with gunshot wounds in their arms. What had happened was the husband was supposed to awaken for a job, and what happened was the alarm didn't go off right. And so he shot his wife in her sleep, in her arm, and she woke up and she was mad, and to take matters into her own hands, she went to another room where she had a shotgun. I guess that's what they do, is they have shotgun in every room in the house just in case they get shot by their spouse. And she grabs the gun and she shoots him, and so they're sitting here getting ready for surgery in the pre-operative unit, and this nurse says, I heard something only someone would explain in a country song. Separated by a deputy sheriff handcuffed to their respective stretchers, the husband began, I love you, baby. I'm sorry I shot you. And the wife responded, I love you too, baby. I'm sorry I shot you. That's bizarre, right? And maybe our fights are not that extreme. Obviously, I don't see people's arms in slings. But maybe you don't shoot your wife for setting an alarm wrong or right or whatever. But maybe you get angry at them when they do something that inconveniences your life. Maybe you've said something about them, called them a name under your breath or out loud for the neighbors to hear. Or even if you hid it in your heart, Jesus is saying this deserves judgment. He's giving us a different perspective. He's opening up the x-ray. He's saying it's not just those who commit murder. He's saying those who have anger in their heart, they're sinning against God, and they need a renovated heart. And that only comes when Jesus enters in and saves souls. He says, anyone who says to his brother or sister, Racha, is answerable to the court. Anyone says, you fool, it will be in danger of the fire of hell. This word Racha, it's transliterated. We don't have an English equivalent of it. People think it means empty-headed. Maybe you've called someone an idiot, and you're thinking, I deserve to go to court because I called someone an idiot. Well, it's a little bit deeper than that. You see, when you say everybody say Racha. You're going to get that guttural in the back. Oh, God, it's almost like you're spitting. And that's what it sounds like. When you call someone, that's like spitting in their face. That word was like spitting in their face. And it basically means that they're worthless. When killers kill, it makes the image of God nothing in that person. That's an empty vessel. Their life force is gone. And when hatred simmers in the heart, we see people as nothing, as empty-headed. And of course, how many of you guys have ever called someone a fool? Some of y'all lying. I pity the fool. I mean, Mr. T is going to hell, right? Is that what Jesus is saying right here? No. He's saying that if we harbor this is who we become, because this is who we are separated by God through sin, and because we're held by that standard, we are murdering people in our heart. We deserve death. Eternal. And that's the beauty of Jesus. He's painting what the law really is, and it's much deeper than just murder. It's about hate. It's about killing relationships. And he says, no, you should honor relationships. But if we do make a mistake, guess what? Christ is there with his grace to restore us, but not just to restore us so that we continue to hate each other and continue to maybe even murder each other. No, he's there to change our hearts so that we have the power of God to overcome anger and hate. You see, hate treats the life of another as worthless. When hate occupies a heart, there is no room for love. And Jesus' kingdom is all about love. James chapter 1 verse 20 says, because human anger, not just anger, but it's at the park with a bunch of kids and they're angry at each other and they're like whipping out weapons anger. When you look like animals and your anger is just impulsive, he says when human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Hate does not accomplish what God has saved you for, to love others with the love of Christ. And so what is the common denominator with how you treat people? When people look at you, do they see you as someone who is angry and hateful, or are they seeing someone who lives out of the love of Christ that has saved you? We've heard this say many times. Where two or more are gathered, I will be with you. Jesus says that. But sometimes when I see two or more humans gather, I see anger and conflict and disagreements. That can even happen in a church. Hard feelings arise and hatred begins to simmer, begins to permeate. Things are said, actions are done against one another. When we make our way, what we want, more important than the way of love, hate can develop like an Indiana storm, swelling across, dropping tornadoes in the lives. When we allow hate to dominate our hearts, there's no room for us to love with the love of Christ. So we have to fight. We have to fight, not with hate, but we have to fight away hate with the love of Christ. We have to put up an effort to say, no. I choose love. What is more important? The way you are to love your wife, or the disagreement you want to win with your wife? What is more important? Showing the world the love of Christ, or verbally attacking someone for not doing something that you value more than the love of Christ? What is more important? Controlling something or someone, or showing the love of Christ? You see, God is about bringing people together. And hate, and obviously murder, doesn't do that. And so Jesus carries on and he says what we should do instead of hating. He says, therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled with them, then come and offer your gift. He doesn't want you singing and pretending, oh yeah, I love God, when you are hating the person across the room. If you have hatred in your heart, if you have anger in your heart, He doesn't want your surface religion that you are holding on to. He wants you to leave this room and reconcile with them. And who are we reconciling with? Someone who's done something against us. Many of us in here was like, well, they didn't say I'm sorry, so I don't have to say anything. That's not what this says. If you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother and sister has something against you, what are you supposed to do? Do something you don't want to do. Seek reconciliation to bring peace. You're supposed to initiate it. And so Jesus is saying, don't just wait for them to say, I'm sorry. You could go to them and say, listen, I have this anger in my heart. I can't even worship God because of what you have done in my life. And I just want to tell you that it is hurting me that we aren't on the same page, that we aren't loving each other, that we aren't sharing the love of Christ with each other. But then Jesus goes a little bit deeper. He goes to the other end. He says, settle matters quickly with your adversary who's taking you to court. So if someone has something against you, what are you supposed to do? Do it while you are still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge. This is an immediate thing. Don't wait for them to develop hate and anger in their heart because you haven't done something that you should have done a while ago. It says, the judge may hand you over to the officer and you'll be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. And so he's using the parts of the law together, but this is all encompassing. If you are holding something in your heart, or if someone has had a disagreement and you guys get mad at each other and you're holding it against each other, you don't wait for them to just apologize. You go and say, this isn't right. We're supposed to have love between us and we have this hate between us. Even though it's your fault. But also on the other end, if you have done something to hurt someone, swallow your pride. Go to them for the sake of love of Christ and say, I am sorry. Will you forgive me? Their response is not your responsibility, but your responsibility is to at least try to live out the love of Christ. If you have the means to quench a conflict and you don't do it because of your pride, you are fighting against the love of Christ, not for the love of Christ. If you have called yourself a Christian for years and years and years and still are angry and hateful and bitter than the day that you came to Christ, do you really love Christ? So the bottom line is we need to fight the hate with the love of Christ. And that's what we need to be living for. In Colossians 3:13, Paul writes, bear with each other and forgive one another. If anyone has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. Are you living out of the love of Christ, or are you living out of the anger and hate that you have against people? Don't let this sermon just fall on the surface. Jesus didn't say this, so it just fell on the surface. If you're all about the surface, if you're all about just, oh yeah, I'm not murdering somebody, oh well. Jesus wants to go deeper. He wants to go deeper and change who you are, and that may mortify you. But that change will bring about life. It'll bring about redemption. It'll change the way you treat other people. And there will be animosity between you and other people. You'll begin to see people in a whole different light. You'll be seeing people through the light of Christ. And so we fight for what is right when we fight for the love of Christ. And you may not murder someone, but if you hold on to grudges, if you're withholding forgiveness, if you're speaking ill of other people, whether to their face or behind your back, I'm seriously concerned with who you are when Judgment Day comes. Because are you really loving Christ? Are you really following Christ? You can say a bunch of words. Jesus says, many, many will say, I knew you. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be with me in paradise. If the love of Christ saved you and is shaping you, you should be motivated by his love, not by his hate. So what happens when we sing the song, they will know we are Christians by our love, by our love. They may know you by that song, but do they know you by his love? Or do they know you about petty differences that causes anger and begins to split and divide a congregation? Right? Are we sharing what it looks like to have the love of Christ on us? Or are we sharing what we value more? What we want ourselves? And so when a church begins to lay aside petty differences and begins to live in the life of Christ, lives can be changed in this room. Relationships can be restored in this room. But we can choose to hold on to petty differences, things that in the grand scope of eternity really don't matter. I mean, when you stand before God, do you really want him to look at you and say, really? You didn't speak to your family member for years because of that? I don't want that. And so even if someone close to me has hurt me, and I should at least go to them and say, listen, I want us to be right. I want to forgive you. Now, ultimately, they may decide not to ask for forgiveness. That is on them. You can still be set free. And that's what I want for everyone in this room. Because if we begin to hold grudges and not forgive, what begins to develop in our heart, we begin to treat other people who have nothing to do with that conflict. We begin to develop conflict with other people. And then we are associated not with the love of Christ individually or collectively. We are identified as people who are angry and hateful and backbiting, gossip-filled instead of love-filled. So I want this congregation to show this community what it means to be motivated by love and not by anger and not by pain. And we do it so often in so many different areas. And we cannot allow the little things to detract from those things that we do for the love of Christ. Let's pray.